Is leadership today even worth it?
Our leaders today lie to us.
Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
Our leaders today will cut jobs to save their own job. That's what we believe as leaders today.
In a world where trust in leadership is dwindling, Tyler Dickerhoof, a compassionate and authentic leader, shares leadership's true essence.
We can accomplish a lot alone. What's that worth? And then if you look at the ability to accomplish more with others, now that's significant. It's always worth it to serve others to a higher capacity. Because at the end of the day, that's the only reason we're here.
How do we cultivate leaders who truly care about their people and their purpose?
We are struggling to pass the leadership baton. What if we invest all this money to develop this person and they leave? That's a risk. Because the backside of that is, what if you don't and they stay?
Is it better to have a bad leader or a toxic leader, or just not have a leader at all? Tyler, the Life Edge's mission is to help others learn, grow, and succeed by identifying their edge in life, the thing that makes them unique. So what would you say has been your edge in life?
It changed. My edge in life early on was my intensity, my drive, my willingness to just push. And I realized that had a pretty dire consequence, meaning it really impacted relationships in a negative way. I think since then, and what I've learned is the antithesis, or the ability to battle through that intensity, is empathy. And it's something that I've embraced, something that I yearn to build that connection with others. So it's really empathy, and I would define that as connection. And that has become a superpower that I've leaned into. It's become a way that I yearn to build relationships, is find that connection, being a connector, being someone that is a catalyst. And as my friend Brad Lomenick says, someone who doesn't leave a residue of themselves. That's what now in this part of my life, I so love to embrace and be a part of.
That's a really interesting answer, because you're the first person I've interviewed so far where their edge in life has shifted and changed. But it's interesting to hear that that's adaptable.
I think to give more context there is oftentimes we go through life, and however we best get there, we think, oh, that's the only way there. And, the problem with getting there is this destination disease. Mm-hmm. And you fall under this fallacy that life is about a destination. And so my intensity helped me through trauma. It helped me through difficulty. It allowed me to work at a level that others couldn't. It was partly innate. It was partly built into me. It was part of a unique strength. But then as I got into my mid-30s and beyond, and I started looking back at my track record of where did it go wrong? Meaning, where did I hit this ceiling? Where did I hit that, I can't bust through? And part of that was mental blueprint and mindset. Part of that as well was realizing that my intensity had a very dire consequence. Mm-hmm. And that consequence is it created rifts in relationships. It made people feel used. It made people feel, there's a part of my leadership roundtable, there's a member that she described intensity as this. Intensity is like having the lights turned on in your bedroom in the middle of the night. Our response to that is, turn it down. Let me go back to sleep. And see, the difference is I have bright lights right now, bright lights in front of me that are illuminating the space. And their intensity is fine. 2:00 in the morning when my eyes are shut, dude, I don't want any of that. And that's what I had to learn and realize, that the solution to intensity, and intensity for me was an armor, because it protected my insecurities. And the solution to that was empathy. The solution to insecurity is empathy. And that is vulnerably putting my arms around someone and walking with them. And man, that's way more enjoyable to go about life and build relationship and interact with people with empathy rather than intensity. Intensity relates to the African proverb, one goes fast, many go far. Okay, you can get as fast as you want. You can accomplish whatever you want with intensity. Great. But then when you look around and you realize that you were on a hike by yourself, What does it matter if you climb to the top of the mountain? Did you bring anybody with you to see the sights? Or did you just go up there to check it off the list? And so for me, as I recognize much of my life and some of my early accomplishments were driven by intensity, I also had to accept that the backside, the dark side of that was that I drove people away, that it was too much for people in the concept of, and I've heard somebody say this, oh, if you're too much for people, go find someone else. It's like, I agree with that to an extent. If I'm too much for you, maybe you're not the person for me, that's fine. But I don't need to act in a way to drive you away. That doesn't help any of us. And I think that's where the flip to embracing empathy and connection and just slowing down and going with people doesn't mean that I limit what I can accomplish. Actually expand what I'm able to accomplish with others. And there's a big difference. We can accomplish a lot alone, but then, like, what's that worth? And then if you look at the ability to accomplish more with others, now that's significant. And I'd rather change that significance rather than a little bit of success.
Wow, that's very profound, and thanks for sharing that. And this leads perfectly into where I wanted to go, because you recently did a YouTube live where you were talking about this very subject, and the topic came up as far as you named off these three main influencers that are all very intense, but they all have a giant following, right?
Yeah.
So it was Ed Milet, Andy Frisella, Grant Cardone, very intense people, but they all have a major following. And with you being a leadership coach, these guys are looked at as leaders in their space. And you guys were having this conversation back and forth about the intensity and some of the detriments, like you just eloquently explained. But my question from that is, can you be a leader without having influence?
No, you can't. But you can be an influencer and not a leader. There's a big difference. You know, I can influence you to go jump off a bridge. Okay, I could do it, right? Did that improve your life? That's not a leadership model I'd want to mimic. You know, Jim Jones, the classic cult leader, he was influential, right?
Yeah.
Did he make people's lives better? By my account, no. I think that's the big discerning point. I can have influence, sure. Now, you can be an influencer as our world sees today. And a lot of that is brought up through, what do you qualify as influence? Influence in the part of leadership, to me, is helping everyone accomplish more, to see this mission, to have with vision what we want to do to create a better world. That's influence through leadership. But if I manipulate you just to benefit my world, or maybe just in a short term benefit yours, all right, you know, I can dial up your intensity. I can help you become more intense and more driven. Great. Well, that's fine until it doesn't work. And then you're looking for the next hit. You're looking for the next Band-Aid. You're looking for the next self-improvement tool, rather than helping you say, hey, what makes you you, Chris? What allows you to be the best you and bring out the best in others? And if we can fine-tune that as an influential point, man, you're going to change lives as long as you follow and develop and continue to cultivate that path. And I think that's what part of, like, I'm trying to understand in myself. And one of the great premises that I believe is every single person in this world deals with insecurity. It is a universal human truth. And I believe that if somebody tells you they don't have to deal with it, they just haven't got there yet. They haven't figured it out. They're blind to it. And the more that we embrace it with vulnerability, and say, yeah, that's my insecurity. You know, I had this discussion earlier today on a coaching call, and we were talking about it. The ability to grow to the point where you're in an interaction with someone. And if I'm sitting here and I acknowledge and say we're working together, or we're on the same team, whether you're leading me, I'm leading you, it doesn't matter in this case. We have a relationship. And I get to the point where, you know, intensity, right, is my response to my insecurity. And I get super intense, and you're like, Tyler, my insecurity's showing. right? And you can be like, okay, I know that's you. I know that's part of you. You recognize it. You recognized it was causing a division in our relationship. You accepted it. Now we proceed forward. That level of response to my insecurity does not hamper our relationship. But if I don't acknowledge, if I don't understand it, if I want to avoid it, and sometimes, especially in men, we want to avoid it through our strength, our outward strength. There's almost, through certain period of time in the last, I would say 5 to 6 years, like what does a man really, look like? Well, I don't think the man is that gets up and yells and screams in everyone's face about how alpha he is. That's not a man. That's not someone I'm looking to, be protected and followed by. That's someone who I believe is just as scared as everyone else. And his way to bully past that, as we knew in middle school, was to show everyone how tough they were. Yeah, we have people all over our society that do that. I mean, this is a personal inclination. It was part of the home I was raised in. I wasn't raised where I needed to have weapons to protect myself. I grew up in rural Ohio. All right, I just didn't have that. I know other people are raised in other places of the world where having weapons and brandishing those is a response to the challenges they have. That wasn't for me. And again, I don't think me carrying a weapon, me, brandishing my weapons precludes my ability to keep others safe. Sometimes it's making the decision to say, let's get the heck out of here, Chris. This is not where we should be. That probably is better. But there's also times like, yeah, if I need to stand up and protect and that's the weapon that I need, okay, I'm not opposed to it. And so we get back to certain characters, and that can be displayed in this angst, this anger, this aggressiveness that to me is not really the example of being strong. It's actually exhibiting weakness because we don't know how to be strong and humble and say, hey, you know what? I have weaknesses. Here are my weaknesses. Now try to use them against me because I've already told you what they are. Now all of a sudden they're not weaknesses. They're actually strengths because I've acknowledged them and therefore I can move forward knowing them. And I believe when it comes to leadership, when it comes back to influence, the more that people do that, the more you look at them and say, hey, I want to go with them. Because there isn't this hidden facade that you're trying to figure out what's really their agenda? What are they really after? Because I believe when we think that, and we have to worry about that, man, that's what limits the best of us coming out.
So in that response right there, you're talking about how vulnerability, being able to be vulnerable and share what you're going through will help you connect in a way to then be able to lead people from a way that they can relate to. But how can someone, let's go to kind of a business perspective, how can somebody be vulnerable with their team, with their employees, but not sacrifice like respect or authority?
Well, I think there's a difference between being vulnerable and embracing victimhood. Victimhood is, oh, poor me. Oh, this happened to me. Oh, my life is this or that. Vulnerability comes from strength. It's like, yes, I am dealing with stuff, but that's okay. We're all dealing with stuff. See, vulnerability comes to a point of relatability, the ability to emphasize and connect with someone. And when you're emotionally strong in the midst of it, there's a speaker coming to my event this summer. Her name is Katie Casada, and she has a great little piece talking about storytelling. She's a storytelling coach, and she goes, we tell stories from wounds, not scars. We share vulnerability from wounds, not scars. See, I don't want this to be graphic, but if we're sharing vulnerability from wounds, we're not worried about that wound opening up and spilling blood everywhere. It's healed. Great. I can show you my wounds. I can show you my what's healed, right? And let me flip that. Share from scars, not wounds. I mixed that up, all right? When we share from wounds, it's open and, scars are healed over. That makes more sense. We share stories from scars, not wounds. Hey, make sure you get the right clip. And when we do that, man, it's so much different. Because we've processed it. We've hopefully learned from it. The problem with when we're in wounds and we're talking about leadership and trying to be vulnerable from there, we haven't fully understood what impact that's made in us. And so we haven't been able to utilize it as a connecting point. And I think that's something that I hold on to, and I, it can be depending on the situation, it's like, yeah, let me share what I'm going through, but I'm processing it in the moment. I'm not hurt. I just realize, oh yeah, I got to learn this. It's healing, but it's well on its way. It's not open. And I think choosing authentic vulnerability, not toxic vulnerability, authentic vulnerability is like, yeah, this is really what's going on. Okay, I can deal with it. It's not downtrodden. It's not beating me up. And I think when leaders do that, it's been shown when leaders open up and are more clear, more, I would say, again, transparent. That's the word I'm looking for. When they're more transparent with what's going on, it's been shown that workers dig in deeper. If our organization is facing challenge right now because of either interest rates, because of rising costs, between tighter margins, and we can say to our sales force, hey, I understand it's challenging. Our price point may not be the leader in the market. We're having to go through some supply chain issues, some whatever, that our margin's a little bit higher. We understand the challenge you're going through. Here's the problem. If we cut our prices just to drive sales, then we lose all potential revenue to mitigate any forward coming change. So we're going to ask you to, as an organization, to believe in us, and that we're going to believe in this together, that we provide a valuable product to our customer, that we will stand with them, that we're charging a price that makes it sustainable so we can support that product long term. Because you can go down the road to the discount salespeople that are just driving sales to drive up their profit numbers for the quarter, but where's that going to leave them next year? And all of a sudden, it's not pointing fingers at others, but it's painting a little bit of that story to say, hey, we get what challenges you're under. We get that the consumer is buying less, okay? That's a short-term moment. Let's play the long-term infinite game. How can we better support them and find supplementary products and solutions that help them elongate our business relationship? Because I'm going to play the long game as opposed to chasing the short term. And I believe those pieces of vulnerability, as you're allowed to share, because sometimes you're limited what you can share, drive more engagement. I had a recent podcast, and we were talking about engagement and how engagement is waning in so many businesses. I mean, there's a marked decrease in engagement. And my belief is engagement is, too often leaders are forced to do too much. They're not given time to actually do what they need to do, which is think, which is, be the vision caster, to connect so they can influence. They're still being called to do too much productive work. And that isn't the responsibility of most leadership places. And so what does that do? That limits the ability to engage. Oh man, it's really tough right now. Well, we don't want to ruin morale, so I'm going to keep this all to myself. It doesn't work. There's another instance. I think this was a book I was listening to, Authentic Leadership by Bill George, former CEO of Medtronic. He wrote this book 20 couple years ago. Great book, very relevant today. And he talked about how there was an organization where, I'm mixing up books. It was actually from Kendra Call, story, her latest book about stories. And she shared about an organization. Sorry, I read a couple books. It got a little mixed up. It was the same day. And she shared about the stories people make up. So there was this long-standing executive at this organization. And this long-standing organization, this executive was out one day and he was replaced the next. There was no formal announcement. It was just like, here's the new guy. And what happened is the sales team struggled. They struggled to make sales, and there kept being this pressure. You got to make more sales. You got to make more sales. You got to make more sales. And it wasn't happening. So one of the executives decided to dig a little bit deeper and find out, all right, what's really going on? So started asking people, and they're like, well, dude, Bob was out. He was just here one day and gone the next. We're afraid of ourselves. Like, I don't believe in this company. I don't want to go make the sales. And so he went back to the board and it's like, hey, this is really the story that's being told. And they're like, what? Bob just wanted to retire, but he didn't want to make a show of it. Bob left on great accord. We brought in the new guy. We thought people would be energized by this new influence. And instead, the sales team was dejected because they were left in the dark. Because when there's not a story, we fill in the story. And we're coming back to that engagement and the vulnerability of a leader to say, I may be out of place saying this. This may cost me, but you know what? It's the right thing to do. Here's what's going on. I believe, and I share this in one of my newsletters. You can keep your mouth shut and it'll protect you in the law of court. But the court of law. But you know what it's going to absolutely, convict you in? The court of public opinion. Because when we don't share, we don't say, and we allow people to make up stories, invariably they believe the worst. And I think that comes back to this whole conversation of vulnerability and being willing to be, honest and authentic and pull off the armor and say, this is who I am. I'm not trying to hide anything. And once people know that, then they start to look at your actions and your demeanor in a whole different light.
Mm-hmm. So to go back to that story where Bob decided to retire and his sales team thought he was ousted, we've all, well, I won't say we've all, but a lot of us have seen leaders just who are good leaders, and they get their heads cut off at the chopping block based on numbers, based on performance, different reasons, even though they were a great leader. With somebody who is maybe not in a leadership role and sees stuff like that, what is the case for being a leader? Is leadership even worth it?
That's a real hot button point in today's world. Let me take you to just a 35,000 foot view of what we view as leaders today. Our leaders today lie to us. Our leaders today position for their own benefit. Our leaders today will cut jobs to save their own job. Our leaders today will reduce the bottom line through people expense to drive their own bonuses and profits. Our leaders today will say whatever they have to say today to get someone to applaud them, and they will turn around and say the complete opposite tomorrow to get a different group to applaud them, to go then to a third group the next day and say something completely contrary to both of those to garner support there. That's what we believe as leaders today. That's been the track record for many public figure leaders over the last 3, 4, 5 years. Mm-hmm. So when you ask the question, does someone want to be a leader? Man, it's really challenging. And I think the opportunity is, without leadership, we don't have a better tomorrow. So if you say that you're unwilling to be a leader, well, first ask is why. Are you unwilling to pay the price? See, the price is that there's going to be higher expectations. There's going to be a demand for more authenticity and vulnerability. There's going to be more demands on you. It's always worth it. It's always worth it to serve others to a higher capacity. Because at the end of the day, that's the only reason we're here. As a person of faith and understanding that God put me on this planet for a reason. Mm-hmm. Now, I joke with my wife, I have no problem making a fool of myself in service of others. It's been identified at certain times or the other, but I also come back to that is to say, if I could be open and vulnerable and that allows other people to accomplish more, then what did it do for me to ever hide? Like, what good did that do me? And I think when we come to leadership and the people that are willing to stand up when it's time to stand up, or the willingness for people to encourage and invite, the willingness for people to embrace the difficulties and bind people together and say, hey, we can do this. There's a real value in that in our world. And I think when you look at leadership and you embrace that aspect of it, man, it's so valuable. It is, you could say there's a greater calling. I think all of us have the opportunity to lead because all of those things said, If you start doing that for yourself, lead yourself first, naturally you're going to end up leading others because they're going to look at you and say, hey, Chris, man, I admire you. Man, I really appreciate how you carry yourself, the way you go about things. Man, that really drives me to do more and be more. It's like, awesome. You're a leader for you and others. What a better place to be.
I hope that you're enjoying this episode brought to you by Aceva. Aceva offers all-natural, clinically inspired nutritional products which are designed to help you live life to your full potential. They create custom supplement packs that are tailored specifically to your needs. With Aceva, you take a short quiz, and from your answers, they build a custom supplement pack just for you. I've been using Aceva for a while now. I have more energy, I'm recovering faster, and I'm even sleeping better. And the best part is that these supplements come pre-packed and are labeled AM, PM, and before bed. This helps ensure that I'm getting exactly what my body needs when it needs it. If you're not taking a daily supplement or are just unhappy with your current one, I highly recommend taking Aceva's short quiz and trying one of their custom supplement packs. And if you use code LifeEdge at checkout, you'll save 50% off your purchase or subscription, but you'll also help support this podcast. You can find the link down below. Now back to our conversation. To your point with leaders of today, when you look at corporations and politics, you can find bad leaders, you can find toxic leaders. And there's been a major shift over the last few years in the marketplace, and people are being thrown into leadership roles because they're warm bodies who show up consistently, right?
Yeah.
And in that instance, is it better to have a bad leader or a toxic leader, or just not have a leader at all?
Wow. I mean, that's an interesting question. There's always a leader. You can say there may not be somebody in that position, and maybe the solution there is, if you don't fill the position, see who rises up and takes that role. It could be a great leader. It could be a toxic leader. But I think so many organizations, so many workplaces have been disparaged because they've just thrown a warm body in. And that warm body will revert to some of the bad habits they've seen. It's kind of classic, right? As parents, it's like you either do what your parents did or you do the complete opposite. Rarely do we really find the total road to improvement. Sometimes in actions, but it's a mixed bag of both. And in leadership, I see that happening all over. It's why do you do what you do? It's like, well, that's how my leader led me. Or, man, I had such a bad leader, I decided to do it differently. And almost to a fault in some cases because they overdo it, right? I was with an a-hole boss and now I'm an absolute enabling boss. And it's like, oh, no, I'll do it. Oh, no, I'll do it. It's like you're not helping anyone, right? And so that's the challenge we're in. And I think one of the bigger challenge, I'm 44, I'll be 45 in 6 weeks. So we find ourselves, again, I'm Gen X, this cusp of Gen X millennial. And if we look at a lot of our leadership, I don't want to make this political, but let's make it political. We have two candidates running for president that are 75 plus. Well, what's really interesting in history is when you look back at many of the pivotal generations, the pivotal leaders, they were much younger. They led a forward path. And if we look at it, neither one of these presidents, if they get elected this term, are going to be there for a second term. And we don't know who their vice presidents are going to be. So where is the leadership behind them? And this is much the challenge we're in, and it's facing it. We are struggling to pass the leadership baton, partly because there's not enough Gen X millennial leaders. We're smaller by a generation. If you look at it, a lot of organizations, again, 45, that's a prime time to get into a leadership role, a coaching role. A president, JFK was in his 40s. Roosevelt was in his 40s. Taft was early 50s. You look at some of these presidents and it's like, oh, they were much, 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 much younger. George W. was, younger. Even Clinton was younger. Obama was younger. It's like, okay, this is interesting. And we see that in organizations all over the country where it's this hard path to pass the baton. All right, so there lies the problem, is if we're not doing that early enough, then we're not getting guidance about how well to leave. I mentioned earlier the book, Authentic Leadership. Had the wrong story, but bring back the book. Bill George from Medtronic. Bill George retired from Medtronic when he was in his early 60s. He retired. He's in his 80s now. He's as old as a lot of current CEOs that are holding on. And he said, one of the reasons I want to pass the baton is so I can rise up younger leadership that are going to go the next wave. And I think with that mindset and mentality, are we doing that? Or are we going to leave this absolute void? And in many cases, there's been an absolute void, and that's left it people scrambling to say, oh, Bob retired. Now we bring in the new guy, and everyone's shocked. I'm like, Bob's been here forever. He's a stalwart. What do we do? We're lost. And the opportunity was to actually present that and to, not questioning when Bob retired. That's on him. But it's saying, as an organization, are we developing leaders? And I think one of the caveats to the development space is, oh man, Chris, what if we invest all this money to develop this person and they leave? Well, that's a risk, because the backside of that is, what if you don't and they stay? And that's always the contrary place to that. And it comes into this whole leadership space we're in, and what path are we following? John Maxwell has been one of my mentors, key mentors in life. He has helped me accomplish more than he'll ever think he knew or I even understand. And John's newest book, High Road Leadership, and it really digs into a lot of the topics we're discussing here today. But it really comes into, why are we leadership sad? Because we've held on to a style of leadership that is very focused on today. It's not focused on, how am I acting to get our entire organization somewhere else? And, he describes it as high road leadership, middle road leadership, low road leadership. And a lot of great leaders stuck in the middle. Why? Because the challenges from around them, it's easier to be in the middle and out of the crosshairs. And by choosing the high road, by choosing the road that, is the words of Roger Staubach, the extra mile has less traffic, right? The high road has less traffic because there's less people willing to do it. That means you're willing to stand and say, hey, are we actually acting in a way that's beneficial to everyone, or just a few? Are we so afraid of how people might perceive and judge us that we're afraid to do the right thing, even if it's going to cost me personally? And that's the high road. And that comes back to, are people unwilling to do it? And I believe with the right guidance and saying, hey, yeah, it's worth it. It's worth it because significance is far more fulfilling and gratifying and worthy than any success. But it takes that ability to guide and help people go through those ups and downs. So it's passing the baton and saying, okay, I will pass this to you with faith and trust that we're going to work together through this process. And I don't expect you to get it right because I'm going to check out. I'm here to be engaged with you and continue to be a part of this organization. That's where I see a big void in leadership.
Right now, when I talk to a lot of the younger generation, 20 to 30-year-olds, they're looking for purpose, right?
Yeah.
And when I look at some of the older leaders that are stepping out of their position and they've been at a company for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and I ask, like, hey, why did you do it? What was going on? Well, I needed a job. And so you make money. And then the next thing you do is you move up and then you become leadership. And then you just keep making more money because that's what life is. And then you look at where they're at now, and maybe they made a lot of money, but what purpose did they serve other than being a cog in the wheel, essentially, or a cog in the machine? And I think when I talk to these 20 and 30-year-olds, they're like, I don't want to just be a cog in a machine. So how can the leaders who are looking to pass the baton create purpose for these employees? Because my consensus, this is my personal consensus, is the younger generation doesn't just care to go to work for a paycheck. That's not enough to move them forward. Whereas the previous generations, that was enough to keep them in the job market, keep them moving forward. And so how can leaders then create leaders, but also create purpose so that their employees want to then continue moving forward with the company or what they're doing?
It's a real conundrum for a lot of people. And to me, was very interesting is looking at the effect over generations. And you go back early 20th century, and it was a movement into the industrial world. It was movement into, hey, you do have opportunities, so you can go get those things. It was, post World War II, where you had people coming back, and we're in that place now where, again, generationally, you look at the baby boomers, the greatest generation, they coming into the workforce post World War II. And it was like, hey, we have this huge demand. We have all these needs. We have a growing society. It's just work and you're going to be rewarded. And I think the response of the current 25 to 30-year-old, and you got to remember, when did they grow up? They grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s. They saw a world that boomed. They saw a world with destruction. They saw a world that, okay, you can work all you want. My parents were both born in the early 50s, 50 and 51. And I was out of the house, but my younger siblings in that 07, 08 range, where it affected me very much professionally early in my career, it also affected my parents because whatever wealth they had built up, gone. And so I think all of a sudden when you start thinking about, okay, kids that were 8, 9, 10, 12 years old, now they're adults working in these places, and they saw their parents who devoted everything to an organization, had investments, and it was laid off and gone because that's what happened in our world. They're like, why do I want to devote everything to that leader who comes out of it with a 35, 40, $50 million bonus, and we're out of work and we're scrambling to have somewhere to live? Do I want to end up like him, or do I want to do something that actually serves the world? And that's the context we're in. And so I believe too often, leaders today have said, oh, these kids come in, they're so entitled. They want to go from, nothing to CEO day one. It's like, okay, well, twofold is there so many opportunities for business growth and in those pursuits that they're allowed that, because the alternative is they could walk out the door and do it. So if you don't want to engage them and get that value from them that they probably know about some more of these avenues of business direction than you do, shame on you. Number two is help connect the dots. I mentioned earlier the organization that is willing to, it's all good. The organization that is willing to be vulnerable and tell people what's going on is going to have higher engagement. And with higher engagement, people are going to see the purpose. It is that part of what your business is doing. And making money is not a purpose. Making money is a result. Mm-hmm. You got to make money in order that you can stay viable, stay in business, but that's never the purpose. And when people reward individuals, I've seen this in network marketing, I've seen it in capital, different corporations. Oh, we're just going to throw money at them. The number of people that leave jobs every day to go from one income to a lower income, that doesn't hold water where income is the driver. It's culture. It is purpose. It is, am I using my talents or am I just a cog in the wheel? And I think that those are all noble desires. They're noble desires because one of the second great truths, I believe, one is all of us have insecurities. Two, all of us have a purpose. And whether we recognize it or not, we're constantly yearning to find, discover, and live out that purpose. And for a leader to say, oh, that's not important, man, you're just not clued into what is really driving people. Mm. What I think is so funny is I've seen this, some of the generational work is, there's this belief that, younger generations, they want this or that. So they'll give them for example, a younger generation wants a more accommodating workday. work from home, flexibility there. And what's so funny is when they go through and they do this at organizations, it isn't just the 30 and under your workforce. The 50 and older is like, man, I really like this. This works for me. This is great. So that humane, quality to it is universal. It's not just a one segment. Can we talk about the work from home situation real quick?
Yeah, I actually
Can I bring up a theory?
My next question was about work from home, so go for it.
Okay. Well, why don't you go to ask the question and I'll make it fit. You're the host. I'm not.
No, it's good. My next question was talking about work from home as it's been a big shift in society. How do leaders stand out? And as everyone's working from home, you're not meeting people at the water cooler anymore. All of that's gone. And then how do you lead in a work from home situation in general?
Yeah. It's a challenge. You got to be intentional. You can't just rely on the I'm going to stumble across you to pick up the gold nugget. You got to go dig. You got to go mine for those relationships and those connections. And a lot of your interactions are probably going to have nothing to do with business, but they're all going to be that tangible human connection piece. One of the things that strikes me, so people in my community that are in their late 20s, early 30s. For me, when I graduated college in 2001, I was one of the first classes where we had to turn in all of our work on the internet. We had to, upload it online. I was one of the first, 2000. It was probably fall of 2000. Fast forward to many 28, 29, 30-year-olds that I know, man, a lot of them went to most of their classes junior and senior year fully remote. They didn't walk into a classroom. Maybe they did for a lab, maybe they did for a group project, but most of their, most of their class was online. You couple that with during COVID and everything else, and now you have people that are conditioned to do work effectively, I'm stressing it for a reason, remote. It's just unbelievable that would be the case. So we've taken a society. My sister is, let me do some quick math. She is 28. She'll be 29 this year. And as she shared when she graduated college, this was 10 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that, 6 years ago. I mean, again, my math is real fuzzy right now. 6 years ago. Most of her classes were online. Most of her classes were remote. One, because that university, they had an on-campus enrollment of about 10,000, had a total enrollment of 107,000. Mm-hmm. 10,000 in person, 107 total. 97,000 people were getting education online. Those people are all working somewhere. So you're telling me I can go get an MBA from Stanford, from Harvard, from Yale, from Cornell, from whatever school, Ivy League school and high regarded school you want. But then I got to show up in your office 5 days a week or I'm worthless. And something doesn't seem right. And it's really that I couldn't do the work because you've accepted that my degree and what I did was good enough. What it is you don't know how to lead me. You don't know how to create a culture where I can manage the in-person and the remote. See, that's the great opportunity for leaders to say, hey, there are some people. Like my sister, it's funny enough. My sister works for in the DOT for state of North Carolina. Again, I told you about her being remote classes. She realizes I don't like working remote. I want to work in office because I like to be around people. That's where I get the most. It's like, okay, good for you. You can work remote if you need to, but you prefer to be around people. I prefer to be around people. I'm more of a social person. I'm an extrovert. Well, I also know there's some days where I'm best off just by myself getting stuff done. Going to an office, those things, it becomes cumbersome. Mm-hmm. But there's some days where it's like I yearn for that connection. And so understanding what job you have, and if it's available and optional, then embrace it rather than fighting it. The organizations that say, you are dead to me, essentially, and those are not exactly those words, but we will not allow remote work. Well, you've put yourself into a corner where now all of a sudden the only available talent are people that are willing to come in person. All right. Your office is in, San Francisco. Maybe you have a great culture, a great office. Not everyone wants to live in San Francisco. Not, when you look at the cost of living in San Francisco compared to other parts of the country. Man, there's this lady, she lives in Topeka, and she's outstanding, but she doesn't want to relocate. Would you come, a couple days a month? We'll make it work because you're that valuable. You bring that much. People do that all the time with great success. And what I found recently, Mark Miller, VP of Leadership Development, former VP of Leadership Development at Chick-fil-A, shared this with me on my podcast. He goes, the average person in an office setting is interrupted every 3 minutes. And yet it takes 20 minutes to regain the focus that you had before that interruption. So he goes, there are people that show up to work 5 days a week that are never focused. What's funny is I shared that on TikTok and it got rave views and comments. And so many people are like, yeah. Well, to me, that's a sign. If there's enough people like, yeah, I'm experiencing that, then it's something we need to address and be willing to embrace rather than say, oh, it won't work.
And so to me, on the opposite end, just listening to you state some of those facts and talk about your sister it sounds like we're missing leadership just in general. Because when you have, there is a pushback in the work from home culture of like, well, there is no more, I'm working to get ahead and working to continue to advance things. It's just, I'm doing what I'm doing to not lose my job. Like I'm just going to do enough to not lose the job and make sure that I can sustain. But there are people out there who are still crushing it and still doing a great job. But even in the culture or the environment where people are in work, there's like you said, most people are just interrupted. So are you really getting work from anybody just because they're in the office, or are you just paying for a warm body to sit in a seat?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think,
Well, I mean,
go ahead.
The organizations that I know that have embraced that say, yeah, all right, 2 days a week, we're going to focus on in-person stuff and we're going to do things. And I had a friend tell me this. He during COVID, they went remote, but they towards the end of it, they required, hey, you got to be in the office 2 days a week on these 2 days, so that way we can interact. And he goes, now they have a policy where they're in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They can work from home Monday and Friday. And he was telling me is like, now there's so many meetings and so many disruptions. He responded to my TikTok reel that I shared because like it's real. And I'm like, dude, how about making these interactions more meaningful? Set the intention. Yes, we're going to have a 30-minute just connect time. Something good will come out of it. And I think that is what's so hard for many organizations to embrace is that schedule, that allowed just interact. Because if you interact and it's this playground mentality, man, something productive will come out of it. Absolutely. It can't not. Instead of going, and he said, I'll go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting and talk about the same stuff in 4 different meetings, and we never got anything done. It was the meeting about the meeting about the meeting about the meeting. And it's insanity. All right. To jump back to the leadership component of it, the real issue in our world today, Bill George, he wrote this book, Authentic Leadership, in 2003. And he talked then about the leader of the future is the person that is more focused on the human skills and abilities and not the tactical. Adam Grant in his book, Hidden Potential, talked about if we focused more on character skills rather than career skills, how much better suited we would be to perform. And there was a time and place absolutely where technical was a necessity because of the tools that we had. And now we understand and realize that, oh, the technical's easy to fix. The human side of it, the character side of it, the emotional side of it, which is a very part of human interaction, man, that is way more important. I shared a question on social media the other day. It's like, do emotions have a place in business? Absolutely. Because we're people. We're not robots. And we doesn't mean that we're out of control with our emotions. No, we're in control of them, but yet we express them and we allow them because that's what allows people to connect. In my opinion, it's very, very hard, or you're unsure if someone is unwilling to connect with you emotionally. I don't think it's possible to build a connection without emotions. That you should be able to see my face and see, how I react. I mean, try doing it. Try to, talk to somebody that's monotone that you can never see any of their face. Dude, you're like, okay, it's vanilla. You're dead. Like one of the greatest classes I took in school was interpersonal communication. And one of the facets of that class was how much of communication has nothing to do with the words we speak. It's our body language. It's how do we set the stage? Well, that's all emotionally connected. And it's not this negative that some people make it to be. It is when it's harnessed and it's understood and it's embraced. Man, it comes back to the authentic vulnerability. You can get so much out of yourself and others when we embrace it rather than mask it.
Mm-hmm. And I know too that your body language and your emotions play a role in human connection because my wife tells me so all the time. So I want to jump back to something you had mentioned a few times, which was insecurities. And so we all have insecurities. Leaders have insecurities. Non-leaders, basically, if you're human, you got insecurities.
Yeah.
But how can people leverage their insecurities to propel them forward rather than hold them back?
Yeah, this is a real pathway framework of my personal growth, and it's something that I walk through in the course that I have, the Awaken section. And I think first off is recognizing them. Just recognize you have fears and insecurities. Oftentimes people are like, oh, you have to squash fears, no, they're real. I'm scared of mice. They're real. But I can take power over it and say, all right, well, take a deep breath, fine, move on. The insecurities that I have, if I can embrace them and say, yeah, okay, I am in the process of figuring out where they came from, or I understand when they come up. What situations they're in where my insecurities start to, drive me and cause a reaction to me. Oh, okay. When I recognize that, then I can start doing something about it. And I think the next part of that is doing something about it is owning how you show up. One thing that I think it's very interesting is we, struggle with recognizing and putting name to our fears, or understanding and appreciating we have insecurities. And when we do that, if we recognize our fears, and then we can own how we show up to people. Because our fears are going to show up and they're going to make people will feel it. I believe this is when we admit our insecurities and accept our insecurities and how they show up, everyone's like, oh, finally, I knew it. I didn't know what it was, but I just knew it. And, when we own how we show up to others, then we can start to understand why they react to us in the way they do. And then the third part of that is we have the ability to control our mindset and beliefs. So if we know and accept what our fears are, we understand how it impacts and affects others, and we own that, then we can start to create a different path forward. But if you don't own your fears and insecurities. You don't accept them. You can't sit there and say, hey, excuse me, my insecurity's showing. There's no way that you can ever change the mindset because you don't know what you're changing. It's kind of like, well, I would use a radio dial, but that doesn't work anymore because we don't have those. I mean, some cars do. Let's go with our satellite radio, and you change the station. If the screen is blank and you're just turning the dial and turning the dial, turning the dial, you have a really hard time of finding the station you want. You can just go through the whole process, right? Mm-hmm. But if it's illuminated and you can see where it's at, even if the dial's broken and it skips ahead 2 or 3 times, you can manipulate it to get where you want to go. And I believe that's the same when we understand our fears and insecurities and how it affects others, and we can change the mindset and our beliefs about what that insecurity means and what it doesn't mean, then through growth, we can absolutely impact and lead people. And so I think the facet of leadership development and growth and being a better leader is not trying to hide those fears and insecurities, but embracing them, admitting them, acknowledging them. And through my own experience, that's freeing because you start to be who you are, but it's also way more relaxing for others around you because they don't feel this tension that your insecurity drives.
Mm-hmm. Wow, Tyler, you have literally given us like a masterclass on leadership and overcoming insecurities, and there is so much in this conversation. I know that you have an offer for our listeners. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so one of the video course that I put together, and this was just something that was given to me. It was given to me because one day I had to, put together a keynote for an event, and I was thinking, all right, how do I put this together? And it was revealed to me the 4 barriers of leadership. And we've talked about insecurity. That's the first one, recognizing what does that look like. The next one that I identified was insensitivity. And give you a little description is, I don't care what you're going through. Just get the job done. That insensitivity is a barrier in our ability to lead. The next one is inactivity, meaning, I don't want to have to deal with the problem. I'll just avoid it. It'll go away on its own. That's a barrier of leadership. And then the last one, which we've talked a little bit about as well, is intensity. And those 4 barriers I break down. I kind of give a lot more color and picture to them. That's again, a free video course that you can access at my website, tylerdickerhoff.com. Just the banner at the top, 4 barriers of leadership. I'd love to share that with you. And it's a great way to kind of start to identify how to work through some of these limitations that we inherently have. And until we identify, it's really hard to work through and get over.
As we start to wrap up here, the last question I love to ask all our guests is, what is one lesson that you've learned in life that you want to share with the listener?
Oh man, one? Just one lesson? Just one lesson? Smile. I think that's the lesson that I've learned over time, that we can diffuse so much tension. We can change something in ourselves if we just smile. Smiling changes not only yourself, but others. I've had the opportunity to work with people in totally different cultures, where totally different language, totally different customs. But one of the most universal displays of communication is a smile. And I think the more that we do that, it not only changes our internal physiology, but also impacts and affects others. And it's something that I found can completely diffuse my, intensity. It can totally, change the insecurity. It can and really affect you. And so that's something I've learned, a lesson that I've picked up that really has a major impact.
Well, I know that I can take that one to heart because my default is smiling. I had a long time with braces and a lot of money put in my mouth. And so initially it was just I'm showing it off, and then eventually it just stuck. So I love that one. Where can people go to connect with you or learn more about you?
Yeah. Yeah, two main pathways: YouTube, where there's a lot of content, podcast, a couple lives each week, but also some shorts and clips from each of my podcasts. And then my website, tylerdickerhoof.com. So you can go to YouTube and search Impact Driven Leader and go to tylerdickerhoof.com, and would love to engage with you. I send out a weekly newsletter accompanying my podcast. So if you go to my website, you sign up for the 4 Barriers of Leadership, you also get enrolled into that weekly newsletter. Would love to share that with everyone listening.
For everyone that's listening, I will make sure to include all of those links down below in the comments or the show notes. If you like this podcast, please like, subscribe, share it with a friend. If you're listening on Apple or iTunes, please be sure to rate and review this podcast so we can continue to get amazing guests on here like Tyler. Tyler, thank you for your time today. This was fantastic. I really appreciate you being a guest on the show.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for having me. Thank you for just the relationship we're building. I appreciate the work you do. I appreciate what you're doing to serve people. I look forward to, spending more time with you in the future and serving your community, because I think one of the things that I've learned is there can't be enough people that are trying to help others grow and develop and become the best versions of themselves. And so the more that we champion each other, that's what really is going to help us serve and create an impact. So again, thank you. Thank you for your opportunity to be here and share.